webinar, Clearing Up the Cloud, Solutions for Districts. My name is Marie Bianada, and I am COSIN's Project Director for the Cloud Initiative. COSIN, the Consortium for School Networking, is a professional organization that is serving K-12 technology leaders through the strategic use of technology to improve teaching and learning. Our core value is the primary challenge that we face in technology effectively is human, not technical. And our audience is school system technology and education leaders. For that reason, COSIN focuses on leadership and policy. Can we move the slides, please? Before we begin, we would like to thank our corporate partners without whom this work would not be possible. Today, we are very, very fortunate to have with us two experts, Andrew Moore, the CIO of Boulder Valley School District, and William Demby, who's an infrastructure specialist at Idaho Digital Learning Academy. Gentlemen, I wonder if you could introduce yourself a little bit and tell us what you've done so far with cloud. Andrew?
All right, great. First, thank you for the opportunity to be able to talk about what we've done and answer any questions that may be out there. I'm Andrew Moore. I run the Boulder Valley School District's IT infrastructure. We're at 30,000 students, about 4,500 employees across 55 buildings, so I'd call us a mid-sized school district. We have moved aggressively to the cloud, starting with our ERP system, HR, payroll, finance. 5 years ago, we moved that into an Amazon web hosted services provided through the vendor. We did that because we were struggling internal to keep the servers running up on a consistent basis, but it opened the door for further transition to the cloud. We've moved many applications to the SaaS world, software as a service, but most specifically I want to talk about Infinite Campus, our student information system, which was moved to the cloud last summer. It's hosted with the vendor itself, but they take care of all of the hardware, the backups, the redundancy of the system, and we've had great success there. The latest big move we've done is shutting down our data center. So we had about 150 servers running locally on a NetApp SAN. We were able to keep it running, but I made the decision that we were going to go to the cloud, a different data center where we had professionals that ran our data center as the only job that they did. And so that 150 servers has turned out to be 110 now. We've reduced the server load. We've moved those 110 out to a hosted solution. And that hosted solution is about 40 miles away. We would never know it. It functions very well, and all the infrastructure support for those servers is handled by this third-party company. The last big thing on our platter we're right in the middle of through an RFP, and that is to take our on-prem phone system, which is currently an Avaya system. It is getting at its end of life, and we're going to move to a hosted VoIP solution for that.
Thanks, Andrew. William?
Yeah, my name is William Demby. I'm the infrastructure specialist for IDLA. We're a state-funded online course provider for Idahoan students. We have consolidated online learning for roughly 115 school districts and serve about 24,000 students total. We made the decision to move to the cloud probably 3 years ago when we moved to AWS. We were migrating physical buildings and then decided, you know, should we throw all of our servers, our student information system, etc., in the back of a truck and just ship it somewhere, or should we look into migrating to the cloud? And we decided to move to the cloud. As far as infrastructure goes now, on-prem we have our phone system, a firewall, and 2 switches. Besides that, our SQL server, web servers, even our domain controllers, which we authenticate against locally, are all stored in the cloud right now.
Great. So let's get started. The first question I have for you is, what do you mean when you say cloud? William, would you like to start?
Yeah, so when I say cloud, I think of it's not just a normal network, right? So cloud, you have things like elasticity, you have things like buckets for storage. So it's kind of like an external network, but that gives a little more. That gives you functionality that on-prem networks typically don't have.
Thanks. Andrew?
Yeah, I make the distinction. I agree with everything William said, but I make the distinction that if we're talking about the cloud, it just means it's not on-prem here. And then once you're in the cloud, there's different variations. And what I've found through this almost 5-year journey now, any one variation of the cloud probably won't solve all your needs. So, for example, with our ERP system, HR, Finance, Payroll, we are in a private hosted cloud. So it's our own servers, it's just managed by the vendor, and it's hosted at AWS. On the flip side, we're a Google shop, so our calendar, email, doc services, all of that is handled by Google, but that's a traditional software as a service. And being in the cloud under a software as a service means we don't have as much control. Actually, we have no control in the sense that when Google wants to add new features, they do, and they roll it out, and we continue to utilize those features or not. If they change the look and the feel of the product, that's on them to do it. So SaaS, in that case, is different than having a single instance private cloud with, say, our ERP system. But the line for me is I do not have the hardware, the infrastructure on site. The hardware and infrastructure is hosted someplace else.
Thank you. Next question, and this is one that I hear very often as a concern. Once you actually make that full shift over to the cloud, is your IT department just superfluous? You don't need them anymore?
So I'll jump in. It's a great question, and you can imagine any time that you start talking about outsourcing in any way, and I would say moving to the cloud is a form of outsourcing. The first question is, oh my gosh, I'm going to lose my job. And the reality of it is some jobs do go away. However, other jobs get created. And so I'll take our data center move, for example. We did eliminate 3 data center positions. However, we didn't eliminate them by letting people go. We eliminated them by attrition. And then there were other jobs that came up. So I have a senior position that is my vendor relationship manager. I never had a vendor relationship manager before because I was doing it all in-house. Now I have somebody that is managing the contracts, managing the relationships, taking care of escalations, ensuring that we've got just really good relationships with these vendors that we're dealing with. The other thing that has changed is our security. So the expanded role with our security individuals has changed. They're just not focused on the security of the internal network and 30,000 kids, some of which may want to be hacking into us and doing what they do, but they have to also now grow their skills and expand the capabilities of that department in order to understand how these cloud-based applications are doing security and ensuring that we're not signing up for anything that has subpar security. And then it's really a discussion as well with your financial arm of whatever institution you have, because there's opportunities to redeploy people into jobs that add more value to the business of education. So does IT go away? Does it become irrelevant? Absolutely not. I just think we become more relevant because we're focusing on more important things than what we were doing before.
You have anything to add, William?
Yeah, for sure. So I guess strictly from an infrastructure perspective, my opinion is the cloud is this amazing and wonderful thing and new thing, but also the same thing still. Kind of like, I guess, a 12-pack of soda, right? Like you have the big rectangle box, then they made like that smaller one where you grab a soda and it all moves forward. It's nicer, it's a better way to do things, but you're still doing the same thing. You still have to know about networking. You still, rather than having a NAT server, you have a NAT gateway, which is, infrastructure as a service. So you still need technical individuals who know what they're doing. You don't just hit one button and then you're migrated to the cloud and all your problems go away. you still need qualified individuals who know what they're doing. And as Andrew was saying, you might get different problems, but in IT, you're always going to have problems and always have work to do.
So Andrew mentioned security, and that is my next question. Which is more secure, having your own district-owned infrastructure on-prem that you control, or having infrastructure as a service in the cloud?
Yeah, I could jump in on that one. So I guess the first portion to look at with that would be physical security. At our old location, our servers were actually very, very secure. I mean, we had maybe 2 smart cards given to 2 individuals who also needed to know a PIN code to get into that server room. So from a physical aspect, like that's probably, your data, as long as it's in that room, there's a good chance physically it's safe. Contrast that to our current location where our firewall is, basically just locked up with a key, and that's it. And, there's multiple individuals with that key to get into it. But again, since none of our sensitive or important information is stored in that closet now, physically we're a lot more secure. From a networking perspective, again, it depends how your infrastructure is set up. If you have a firewall configured correctly on-prem, chances are you're going to be secure. Same thing within the cloud, though. In the cloud, you don't have any disadvantages I could think of from a networking perspective from having it hosted externally.
So I totally agree. So physically here, our data center is in a high school. Now most people don't know it's in the high school, but it is in a place that is less secure than where our new hosted data center is at. Prior to me taking this job 7 years ago, we did have a break into that data center where they climbed through the ceiling tiles. They pulled the pins off the door, which happened to be inside the data center, and they walked away with a number of devices that weren't bolted down. Fortunately, none of the big servers walked out. But that's a lot of school districts can't afford to have the physical security that these hosted data centers have. To contrast that, the data center that we're in now that's south of Denver, you drive up to the parking lot and you can't get onto the parking lot without a security guard having a visual representation of you and having you on a list. At that point, a big gate opens up and you can park your car, and then you walk to another perimeter fence where you have to have a similar conversation with the security personnel to get through that door. You walk through that door and you're funneled into a security kind of onboarding area, and you can't get past that until you have an escort that has come out to meet you. That escort then can get you into the data center, but they can only get you into your cage where your devices are inside that data center. So just the levels of physical security at professionally hosted data centers are far more secure than anything that I had on-prem. And then as far as the logical security, the firewalling, the networking, I have a very small staff. And so the resources that are at these hosted data centers, they have staff that's working 24/7 that are preventing hacks and malware and viruses and a whole host of other things that can happen. So the depth of the teams at a hosted data center are much more robust than anything I could ever provide here locally.
So let's get on to the next question. We talked about security. Let's talk about the other advantage that's often discussed when we talk about cloud, and that's cost effectiveness. Do you find that cloud is a more cost-effective option?
That's a tough question. It is, for me, more of a value proposition. So in order to do the data center move, we did eliminate a few positions, right? We did that through the normal attrition process. That freed up money to be able to go to a hosted infrastructure. The value, though, that money is basically going straight over to the hosting company. I find that I have a higher level of service now simply because I'm at a place where the depth of knowledge is so much greater. So the value proposition is bigger. The other thing that I found maybe it costs me a little more overall to be in the cloud, but when I need a change, if I need another server, or if I need more memory, or more CPUs, that literally is a ticket that is acted on and transpires within 30 to 60 minutes. My internal staff was so burdened with so many things that getting a new server updated and put into production would just simply take more time. And that's not a cut on my folks that I had working on it. It's just that they had other things going on which distracted them from the core business of being a data center and providing the security and the resources and functions that go with that.
Of course. You talked about the depth of knowledge that is available to you through the folks that are working at the cloud infrastructure. Can you give some examples of where that's been helpful to you?
Yeah, so from my perspective, when you look at, let's just say a security engineer, when I talk about depth, it means that there are enough security engineers working at the hosted center that they are there 24/7, 365. Where I have one key security engineer who works his normal 5 days a week. He takes vacations, all the things you'd expect. And so I don't have the depth. We have backup for him, but the people that back him up do not have that level of knowledge that you get when you go into a professionally hosted environment.
Great. William, what are you finding with respect to cost efficiency?
Yeah, not a whole lot I could comment on this because, again, I typically deal with the infrastructure and networking strictly, not so much the budgets. But I guess a fun thing to look at would be our storage costs online. We use a service called Amazon S3, and we basically pay monthly about a penny per gigabyte a month, which could even be reduced further to a fourth of a penny a month, depending on what backup solutions in the cloud you use. So I guess that's a fun way to look at it is, I looked online, how much is a external terabyte hard drive. It changes to be roughly 13 cents per gigabyte. So there's just fun calculations you could do there to see how long would it take to pay off an external hard drive versus monthly hard drive costs, when you also take into effect having to swap out those hard drives when they're full, if they contain sensitive data, having to transport them or disposing of them, etc. So I guess there are calculations you can do to see how long it would take for on-prem infrastructure to pay itself off versus a cloud service.
So I'm seeing a question here that came in along these lines and around our file servers, and do we still provide file shares? And we do. We still have what we call our H drive, which are hosted. The latency that we have to our data center is sub 10 millisecond. So for file transfers, it works fine. But more importantly, we are moving our infrastructure for storage to the cloud through Google Drive. And so everybody has their Google accounts, and the culture over the last 4 years has changed. So I would say probably around 70% of what we do now in this school district is done in Google. It's in Google Docs, it's in Google Sheets, it's in Google Presentations, which are stored obviously in the cloud. And so there's less need to have on-prem storage. Ultimately, I haven't shut it off yet, but I'm probably, I don't know, a year and a half to 2 years out to coming up with a full enterprise-wide storage solution where you can have shared storage that would work better than, say, Google Drive, where you have individual shared storage, but where you could have team shared storage. So once we roll that out, I suspect that we will shut off completely our local stores for our H drives.
Yeah, and to spring off of what Andrew said, there's nothing that says you can't virtualize that FTP server you have on-prem, right? That's what we did, is we have an H, J drive, etc. that we use for file transfers and as a file share, but the only difference is rather than having it in that network closet, it's just virtualized in the cloud.
Great, thank you. And so the next question is about your own implementations. Why did you decide to shift your infrastructure to the cloud? William, would you like to start?
Yeah, so I touched on it earlier in my introduction, but we had the decision of physically moving our servers to a new location, which again was not secure or secure in our minds, or to virtualize it and throw it onto the cloud. So keeping our security in mind, and then keeping, the value of our data, I guess. To us, it just didn't seem that moving our valuable data physically was appropriate. But virtualizing it, making sure it was in a secure location, was why we decided to throw it on the cloud.
Great.
And for me, it all started with making sure that I had the right staff and depth of knowledge to ensure that when we had outages, we got things back online. One of the challenges I have living in Boulder, Colorado is that I compete for IT resources with companies like Google and Microsoft and a whole host of startups. It's like a micro Silicon Valley right here in the Boulder, Denver area. And so it's oftentimes hard for me to fill critical positions. And so that was the initial thought process. But it really went back to me having a comfort level that may be greater than others because I worked at Sun Microsystems before I came to this job, and I was on their utility computing team for a few years. Utility computing was the predecessor to cloud computing. It was the kind of the skunk works inside of Sun Microsystems to figure out how to do what Amazon, Google, and Microsoft have now done successfully with their cloud offerings. So that knowledge and understanding of the security and the functionality around it that was stable and worked really was already a seed. It was planted where I had the confidence that if we needed to go this way, that we could pull it off. I look back and I kind of think, what was I thinking when I moved our ERP system as our first cloud app, right? You think about HR, payroll, and finance as being the first one to move. But at the same time, I had an aging infrastructure, and we were having outages at a level that just wasn't acceptable. We made the move, and in the 5 years, I could think of one significant outage we've had in that infrastructure. And the vendor took care of it, but it was one over, well, it's been 5 years now since we made that move.
So good move.
I have no regrets, for sure.
So now that you're in the cloud, what services do you currently use or plan to use?
Do you want to start that one, William?
Yeah, I can go ahead. So we use S3 pretty extensively as our backup solution. Also currently we use Google Docs. I also have a question here. Do we use Office 365? We use this as well, another SaaS solution there. We're also working in Azure to complete a machine learning project where basically we'll have the ability to maybe see an at-risk student or a student who will maybe struggle with the class before they even take it. We're also using Lambda in Amazon, which basically allows us to run C# or JavaScript scripts, but without a server. So that's pretty neat as well. Besides that, we've got load balancing set up. You could do that on-prem as well, but it's a little slicker in the cloud. And yeah, those are the major ones I could think of right now.
So for us, very, very similar. In addition to the ERP system, student information system, we use SaaS systems like Schoology for our LMS world. If you look at our data center move, all of our like routing, our bus routing systems are all up in the cloud. Food services is all in the cloud. I think the question for me now is what isn't in the cloud? And the big thing that isn't in the cloud for me right now is our phone system. We currently have an Avaya on-prem system, but I'm in the middle of an RFP right now to basically end-of-life that and to go to a hosted VoIP system that will be our last big piece to move to the cloud. And even some of the things that we've moved data center-wise into the cloud, we are looking to take further into the cloud. So I'll use SharePoint as an example there. We use SharePoint for our websites, for document management. That is in this hosted data center that is still well within our realm. And now we're having the discussion, do we go out and find a SharePoint as a service company where we can just move the whole SharePoint infrastructure up to somebody that really knows SharePoint well, and then we're just responsible for the content. My team does probably 75% content work, 25% system administration work. If I can get that 25% system administration work off of their platter, I wouldn't reduce the team. It would give me 25% more capability to be able to do more in that realm. There was another question that came in on the chat line, and it asked about how do you limit sharing of confidential information in Google by accident? And it's a great question, and one that came up 4 years ago when we went to the Google space, right? What happens if you share a roster list or grades accidentally? And I've come to believe that the Google environment through sharing is more safe and secure because you have the same problem in the traditional world where you may have an attachment of grades or behaviors, and that attachment is stuck to an email, and you send that email out accidentally to the all staff list, and there is no way to get that back. That attachment could go anywhere, where if you're using a Google Doc where you're doing sharing, if you share it inappropriately and you realize you've shared it inappropriately, you could just unshare it. And there's, obviously a period of time where somebody can copy whatever they had in that share. But to me, that's still a better scenario than putting an Excel spreadsheet on an attachment of an email that goes out that you can never get back.
And not to mention that, but on top of that, a lot of times emails are unencrypted, right? But when you do share something via Google Docs or Google Drive, that is encrypted traffic to get that document down and up. So that's another layer of security on top. I have a chat from Christopher Butler asking, did we increase our bandwidth while we were moving to the cloud? So did we basically have to bump up our internet speed or bump up our network connectivity for this migration to be successful? We did not. We currently just have a business line, 50 down, 50 up. That's worked greatly for us, but also keeping in mind that we do have a lot of SaaS providers as well. Blackboard's our LMS, so that's hosted externally. So for us personally, we just have roughly 60 to 70 users using this FTP server, authenticating to Active Directory, etc. So for our use case, we did not need an increase in WAN bandwidth, but depending on the size of your migration and what you're migrating and what actually needs to be accessed on-prem, between on-prem and the cloud, you possibly could.
Yeah, this is a great question, and I would not recommend anybody going to the cloud if their network is already struggling with capacity in any way, shape, or form. We did increase our bandwidth. We went from 1 gig to 4 gig, and we have the capability to get to 10 gig very easily. If you start to see bottlenecks anywhere, the customer experience suffers pretty rapidly. So everything considered, make sure that your network is ready for a migration to the cloud. Otherwise, it will be a very painful experience. When I think about moving our phone system to the cloud, where latency becomes even more important, we have to make sure that our network is rock solid to whatever phone provider that's going to be, so that we don't get jittery calls or we don't get calls that get dropped simply because our bandwidth gets overutilized.
In real life, in the examples that you have lived and dealt with on the ground, what were some of the advantages that you got in migrating to the cloud?
Yeah, so for me, I'll start on this one. The biggest advantage is uptime availability. We talk about learning anytime, anywhere, any place, And what it's really provided for me is that I'm confident that our systems, whether they're learning systems or they're the systems that support the business of education, they're available 24/7, 365. And that wasn't always the case when we had a lot of this on site. You think about just what we do in our personal lives, right? Whether that's getting on Gmail to send an email or Yahoo to send an email, or it's going to our bank and doing online banking at 11 p.m. on a Friday night. Our society has moved to the place where we just expect being able to get to our systems all the time. And moving to the cloud just brings another level of reliability to be able to have that available to you.
William?
Yeah, I'll have to agree with Andrew on that. The reliability and uptime is something that's very very essential and very nice. I've got two recent real world examples. One is I think it was around Labor Day weekend last year. We actually had a squirrel chew through our fiber line, our internet connection. So over the weekend, our entire on-prem internet was down. We weren't communicating to the outside. And I had no idea we had any issues until I stopped in Tuesday and our teachers and employees couldn't get online. But as far as students go, as far as the people consuming our resources and information goes, they didn't notice a single thing. I'll have to say too, this year, Boise, Idaho has been having, a record-breaking winter, record-breaking snow, and our power went out about a week ago. Same thing though, I couldn't tell anything was wrong until we looked in the fridge and some food spoiled and things were melted. But besides that, no calls from students, no calls from teachers that any of our systems were down. So the uptime and robustness of the cloud is definitely there and definitely noticed.
Adding on to that, in the whole network infrastructure, we have redundant internet connections as part of this as well, so that if we do get a fiber break, it'll automatically fail over to our redundant link. And that has happened a number of times. Nobody even knows it happens. The failover is so quick, and then the failover back when it gets fixed is equally as quick. But if you don't have that redundancy, and for me, going VoIP phone in the cloud, if I lose the internet connection, I'll lose my phone service. And so having that redundancy is also, for me, just something you have to have if you're serious about moving to the cloud.
Excellent. And then let's look at the converse. What kind of challenges did you run into?
I think for us, there's two sets of challenges. I think there's first and foremost the cultural challenge, and it kind of goes back to the question you asked at the very beginning. Does this mean our IT teams are going to go away? I think it's on our shoulders as leaders to be very transparent about these decisions, why they're being made, what they mean, what the vision is for other roles and responsibilities, how transition paths may be. We did not do anything where we migrated employees to anybody where we've outsourced or hosted, but that's another strategy where sometimes, I could see that in a data center world, right? If you're going to lose a couple of your data center people, maybe the company you're moving to is needs resources and are willing to pick them up. That could be part of the discussion. But without a doubt, the whole culture side of it. Then the second piece, the second challenge, was really with my peer set and my boss. And not that I had any pushback from the superintendent who I report to, or my CFO or my COO, but just explaining the whole reasoning behind moving to the cloud and helping them understand that there are advantages to that in an environment where, a school district environment where hiring your own employees to do everything has been the cultural norm, at least in Boulder, from the beginning. And so, those conversations were not hard to have, but were very much a necessity to have before we ever started on the journey to move into the cloud.
Thanks. William?
Yeah, so I agree on the cultural challenge. A big one. That's a big one because we even have developers now who are more comfortable having Windows Server running SQL Server rather than just having SQL as a service, which is a possibility in the cloud. So I think the culture hops you have to make are there and will be there, who knows how long. We're still working through some of those. Um, Another thing is, the expertise of in-house and even out of house of how to actually move your infrastructure to the cloud. We went with a model called lift and shift, which is basically we have our on-prem infrastructure, we just virtualize it as is, and then from there we look into using more modern cloud infrastructure. But as is, just take what we have, virtualize it, and then move from there. Um, so, how do you do that? How do you set up a VPN to the cloud? How do you have a domain controller stood up on-prem, and how do you stand it up in the cloud? On top of that, we have internal apps such as our ticketing system, infinite visions for our payroll, etc. And and just migrating apps from one server to another, even if you did it on-prem, there's certain challenges and configurations you have to keep in mind.
Final question. What advice would you give to a district that is considering moving their infrastructure to the cloud?
Yeah, my big one.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. My big one on that, and I don't know why this isn't publicized more, but when you do choose a cloud provider, a lot of them have a different, they give you different regions to choose from. The chances of them having a data center or a main hosted environment geographically close to your location, it won't necessarily be there. So when you look to choose where to host this, where geographically to host it, it's important, obviously, to make sure you have low latency, you can access it, etc. But not just that, but different geographical regions with these cloud providers sometimes have different services. So when you do choose a region and there is a service that you think is necessary in the cloud and a big reason why you want to move to it, you want to make sure that that geographic region offers the cloud services you're looking for.
So from my perspective, I would say go slow to go fast. And we've implemented a change management process within Boulder, did that about 5 years ago, called ADCAR. It just gives you a methodology for change. And we use that in our environment for the more difficult projects we have. And because culture is a part of this change, if you methodically have a way to be able to talk with people, be able to listen to them and get their feedback, be able to address as many concerns as possible, it helps with the move. And then the other thing, and I mentioned it earlier, is don't go to the cloud until you've got your network rock solid. You're just setting yourself up for problems and failure without having that. The network is just the foundation that can't be rocked.
Okay, so we've got a little time for some questions. Do we have any additional questions from our viewers?
It looks like there's a couple that came in on the chat board. Marie, do you want me to go and answer those? Okay, the first one was, have you leveraged E-Rate to support the move to your cloud? And if yes, how was E-Rate supported? So E-Rate was not directly utilized, other than we increased our bandwidth, and our bandwidth is supported by E-Rate, so that's partially subsidized. We upgraded our firewalls to be able to get higher capacity. We were able to E-Rate part of that. And right now, we just completed an RFP to replace our entire network, and that was E-rated. But there's nothing that I was aware of that going to the cloud would allow you to tap into some new way to utilize E-rate money, or at least I wasn't aware of it.
Yeah, I've got one too. So what about printers and printing? So we still have printers on our campus. Are they managed through cloud services? Those are not. Those are all on-prem. And then a follow-up on that question is, do you control access and monitor usage through your cloud infrastructure? We do. There's a service we use called CloudWatch, which can show, all the metrics you want and more, such as uh, network packets in and out, which IP addresses are accessing the server through which port, number of users, etc. So there are tools out there in our cloud environment that do allow us to monitor usage on our cloud infrastructure. I've got another question, and I think you're going to have to help me with this one, Andrew. But what was your bidding process in choosing your cloud provider? How many services did you evaluate before making a final decision?
Yeah, for me, each one is different. So, for example, when we first went to the cloud with Infor, or what used to be Lawson is our ERP system, there wasn't a bid process. It was a discussion with them because they were the only ones that could host it. I wasn't looking to find my own hosting. I wanted to go with their cloud solution. So that one, there was no bid. On the data center, on the other hand, it was a full RFP, written requirements and specs. We had over 20 companies actually bid on it, and so it was lengthy, and we basically chose by value. Of course, price plays a big part of that, but that was weighed against what services we would get, and ultimately the decision was made on a value proposition. I would definitely suggest if you don't go through an RFP process, you at least talk to 3 different vendors on whatever solution is out there that you're looking to move to the cloud, so that you learn. Every one of them will give you a different piece of information, and over time you learn more and more, and you know the right questions to ask, but that only comes with working with multiple vendors on what the solutions may be. There's another question that came in with regard to how do you handle video surveillance where those services migrated to the cloud. So we still have 9 servers that are local and may remain local. One of those is video services. We still have DHCP, DNS. We have a backup DNS server in the cloud, but we have a local one. We're still working on some of those, and it may take another year or 2 to figure out whether some of that gets moved to the cloud or not. I think with our latency, we could move video surveillance, but it's not a high priority for us at this point in time. On a related topic, though, we are a Chromebook shop. I mean, we have really adopted the Chromebooks heavily, and video production became a challenge because you need a Mac, with iMovie, or you needed a PC with Movie Maker. And we just inked a contract this year with a company called WeVideo. And WeVideo allows you to make professional movies, just like iMovie would, in the cloud. And so our students now can do video production on Chromebooks, and I bring this up because it's the same challenge, right? Enough bandwidth to be able to get your video raw footage up into the cloud. But the great thing about once it's in the cloud is rendering happens on huge computers, way bigger than your local laptop would be. So it's just a different way of thinking, and I think we could get video surveillance up there. We just have not done it yet. And Maria, I don't think there were any other or questions coming over chat at this time, or at least I'm not seeing any more.
Okay, well, thanks so much. I would like to invite everyone in the audience to think about joining us in Chicago, April 3rd through 6th, COSIN's 2017 conference, Invent the Future. I personally have been to this conference now many, many years in a row, and it is absolutely one of my favorites. Not just because of the programming, which is first class, but also because of the caliber of the folks who attend. We see a lot of very technical, very thoughtful folks who are bringing us more insight about how they're using new technology and how they're progressing. And so I highly recommend this conference, and not just because I work with COSIN. So registration is open. Please consider joining us. And with that, I think it is time to say goodbye. I want to thank William and Andrew again very, very much for joining us today. Great insights, guys. Wonderful conversation. And I hope that I will see you in Chicago.
All right, I plan to be there. Thanks.
Thank you.
Take care, all.